It's here, the first college football Saturday of the season and the beginning of the 2014 Illinois Fighting Illini schedule. Matt Loveless here, joined by Steve Kelly and Matt Daniels as Inside the Illini Big Ten football starts now.
Inside the Illini Big Ten college football is brought to you by Illini HQ, the News Gazette, News Talk 1400 WDWS and WAND.
Hello and welcome to another season of Inside the Illini Big Ten football. We have a lot to get to here on opening day of the season. Illinois kicks off against Youngstown State here in about an hour, and we've got everything you need up until then. Now we have a new year, but we got the same great minds for football from the News Gazette. Matt Daniels, thank you for joining us again, Matt.
Glad to be here. Steve
Kelly from News Talk 1400, Sports Talk 1400. Steve, let's get your initial thoughts. You've been to camp for a few weeks now. What do you think of this Illinois team?
I think it's. I'm happy that it's finally game day,
yeah.
And we can quit talking pregame stuff. Of course, everybody wants to see what the West Lunt brings to Bill Cubitt's offense. We'll talk more about that as we move along. I think that's a key factor. Josh Ferguson, another one we'll talk about. The big question, though, comes on the defensive side of the ball. Will the defense from Tim Banks be better this year? And we'll start to find out maybe a little bit later on today.
Matt, we'll turn to you for maybe the answer to that question. What do your impressions from camp? Have the improvements been made?
I just want to see if the defense can tackle anyone this year. That's my first objective this season for Illinois. Last year was very, very poor in that department, and they've added depth on the defensive side of the ball, mainly on the defensive line at some defensive tackle and end spots. And as the great Lauren Tate always says, he's always interested to see how the battle up front goes between the offensive defensive line, and that's a huge area that Illinois needs to improve on this year if they want to have more success stopping the run this year.
We have a whole section dedicated to West Lunt, so we won't spend a lot of time on here in the opening. But one guy we probably haven't talked about enough, and he deserves the time, is Josh Ferguson. A lot of people seem to think he is the athlete, the best athlete on this football team. I couldn't disagree if they said that. What are your thoughts on his growth as a junior now, redshirt junior?
Well, I think it's kind of his team. Obviously, you talk about a quarterback leading things, but I think he's a key guy. He had almost 800 yards rushing last year and caught 50 passes as well. So he's a guy that they're going to get the ball in the hands of. Everybody knows it. Youngstown State's coaching staff led by Eric Wolford, they know that. They know much more about Josh than they do West Lunt at this point, so they know they got to stop him if they're going to be able to stop Illinois.
Yeah, Matt, what do you think of Josh's growth over the last month here?
I've talked to Lunt about him a few times this month during training camp, and he says Illinois' offense is going to go as Josh Ferguson goes this year, and he gives them a dynamic threat out of the backfield, can run the ball effectively in between tackles, and also out in space with the zone read, the zone blocking schemes that Illinois has. Ferguson fits well into that. He's not a guy that's really going to, run over a linebacker from Youngstown State today, but he might make him break his ankles with some of the juke moves he puts on. I know he's studied, films of great running backs in the past, and that's something he really incorporates into his game very well.
I remember a beautiful move. You mentioned the juke move. Last year against Miami, he had one that I was looking at some highlights of just this week. Man, if he gets a few of those, he can be a real special player. Well, like you mentioned, the defense is kind of the big question mark. The offense was fine last year, and it'll probably get better this year. We'll get to the defensive topic coming up here later in the show, but we don't want to look too far without setting up some perspective. 2013 wasn't a very good year, but it was an improvement on 2012 for Illinois. We'll take you through the highs and lows as we look back on the season next on Inside the Illini Big Ten football. Nowhere to go but up, right? That was the attitude of some toward the 2013 Illinois football team. Others weren't so positive. A tougher schedule coming off a 2-10 season. They also had that 14-game conference losing streak still dangling out there. It didn't set up a lot of promise as the Illini began the 2013 season. 2013 started with a visit from an FCS opponent, a warm-up game for back-to-back tough ones. At least that's what we thought. The Illini led Southern Illinois by 18 in the fourth quarter, but the Salukis climbed back to find themselves on the Illinois 3 with a chance to tie it.
The quarterback out of the shotgun, steps, lob to the end zone, incomplete, and the Illini have held.
But it was a different team that charged into Memorial Stadium the following week. Illinois put it on a Cincinnati team that would go on to a 9-4 record. Nathan Shieldhouse had a career day with 4 touchdown passes.
I'd like to put defensive coordinators on kind of on the edge.
It's still about him putting our players in position for making plays.
The excitement returned at just the right time for a matchup with a top 25 Washington team at Soldier Field. The game was within a touchdown until midway through the third, when Illinois' defense seemed to tire. 2 quick scores by the Huskies made Illinois' late attempt at a comeback go for naught. A 10-point loss.
We haven't come out in the third quarter and played really this year.
Illinois took care of business in Week 4, a beatdown of the MAC's Miami Redhawks, and it was on to the Big Ten schedule with that dubious streak still in place.
14 games in a row the Illini have lost in conference play, and they get a tough test here against number 25 Nebraska.
Amir Abdullah ran for 225 yards, while Illinois' offense stalled.
You got to get points in that situation.
It's unacceptable for them to have the first 4 drives score points.
The Big Ten losing streak has now reached 15 games.
At home against Wisconsin, it took only 10 minutes for the Badgers to score 21 points.
Again, didn't capitalize on some of the things that we needed to.
Even a promising game turned real ugly real fast. The Illini led eventual Big Ten champ Michigan State after a quarter, but the Spartans scored 42 unanswered in the final 42 minutes of the game.
We can't turn the ball over inside our own 20. We can't not score when we're on the 1.
We're no longer a young or inexperienced team. I mean, we played 7 games.
Ferguson lunging for the end zone.
There was a near win at Penn State as the Illini forced overtime in Happy Valley, but Nate Shieldhouse's first pass in OT was picked off. The Big Ten streak hit 18. The offense broke out after that, scoring 35 points in back-to-back weeks against Indiana and Ohio State. The defense, however, couldn't return the favor, allowing 52 and 60, respectively.
It was Ohio State that started this Big Ten losing streak right here 2 years ago. Now it's the Buckeyes who extend it to 20.
I tell them that I'm proud of the way that they continue to fight, because through adversity, good things will come, and if you continue to fight, and that's exactly what they're doing.
For all the struggles in Champaign, things were worse in West Lafayette, Indiana. The Purdue Boilermakers were 1-9 with similar defensive struggles and an offense that couldn't move the ball. It was an ugly game. Illinois turned the ball over 4 times, but it was Purdue's only giveaway that mattered most. D'Angelo Bentley's interception sealed Illinois' first conference win under Tim Beckman.
We had glimpses of it when we won earlier in the season, but nothing quite like this, because this is conference play and it's been such a long drought.
A final matchup against in-state rival Northwestern remained. Once 4-0, the Wildcats were stuck in a 7-game tough luck losing streak. The Illini found themselves in the lead heading into the fourth quarter, but the Wildcats pulled in front and stayed there, the conclusion of a 4-8 season for Illinois. You remember that big losing streak in the middle there, but let's talk about the good first. The offense, the improvements made on offense. Bill Cubitt came in and kind of didn't clean house, but he rearranged things and was able to make it work. What did Cubitt do so well with this team last year?
Well, number one, I think he had a good quarterback, not a great quarterback in Nathan Shieldhouse, but a guy that understood the offense. Poor Nathan, he'd been through some offensive coordinators over the time, but he picked
couple in 1 year.
That's
even.
right. He picked the offense up, did a good job. When you look at his career stats, he's one of the all-time greats at Illinois statistic-wise. So I think that was a key point. And he had Josh Ferguson coming on a good year as well, with a lot of all-purpose yardage, both running the ball and receiving. Again, the defense, you mentioned some of those games, 52 points, 60 points, but we'll stay on the offense. But Cubitt, I thought Matt was a key guy there.
Yeah, he was, and so were the receivers they had last year. You saw Steve Hull emerge over the second half of the season after he played 3 seasons in the defensive backfield. Ryan Langford, at times before he got hurt against Michigan State last year, was a deep play threat, and Martez Barr at times showed what he could do. Miles Osei, Spencer Harris. That's a group that Illinois is going to have to replace a lot this year. You lose your top 4 pass catchers at that position, and you've got some newcomers like Geronimo Allison and Justin Hardy's kind of emerged at times, as well as 2 freshman wideouts in Mike Dudek and Malik Turner so far at camp. The receivers really just showed what they could do under Mike Bellamy, the wide receivers coach, and Cubitt as well. And I'd imagine the same production will occur this year, especially with Westlawn throwing the football.
I think some statistics worth noting. Nate Shieldhouse led the Big Ten in passing yards per game, better than Christian Hackenberg, the phenom as a freshman at Penn State, better than Braxton Miller. He also finished his career with the yardage total at Illinois. But the bad was that defense. You mentioned the 52, the 60. What went wrong, as well as you can say it? We'll start with you.
Just the missed tackles that last year. They couldn't tackle anyone to save their life or their season, really. Mason Monheim, I know we showed the clip there against Washington, him diving, for a tackle and coming up short. And they didn't really feel their gap responsibilities at times in the linebacking core. And they feel they've kind of addressed some of those issues this year by moving a few players around. Ernest Thomas moving to kind of a linebacker spot this year out of the secondary. Mike Satina played that role last year. He was really out of place at times, just wasn't quick enough to deal with some of the skill players that other teams had. And improving the team speed was a big focus for Beckman and his staff this offseason. And we'll start to see here soon whether that's going to pay off.
Pretty basic element, right?
Yeah.
Tackle the guy with the ball.
Right.
They weren't getting that done last year. A lot of the tackles, when they were made way deep in the secondary,
right.
And gave up 35 points a ball game and almost 500 yards a game. That's got to get better, doesn't
right.
it? That's the way we started the show. Nowhere to go but up.
Right, exactly. Tackling and creating turnovers. That's going to be the big one. They had trouble doing that last year, too. Let's talk about the Big Ten. Big picture. 2 new teams, division lines redrawn. That means no more leaders and legends. Aren't you going to miss that?
No.
And in case you didn't even know, I don't think many of us are, the Illini are in the Big Ten West. We'll break down the division starting there next.
The Inside the Illini Weekly MVP for now recognizing the top performer from Illinois camp. Few would disagree, even opposing coaches, that the best athlete donning the orange and blue out of camp is Josh Ferguson. The junior running back had a 779-yard rushing season in which he also was one of the top pass-catching backs in the country. Ferguson finished third among running backs in receiving yards in 2013 and will look to build on that with a new quarterback this season.
It'll be fun to watch. Welcome back to Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. The second half of our show's title was at the center of conference realignment once again. The Big Ten lines redrawn with the addition of Maryland and Rutgers. And just to give you an idea of what the division will look like for the Illini, here you go. They remain with Wisconsin and Purdue in the West, but a handful of former teams from the Legends division will join: Northwestern, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Iowa. Of note, neither Michigan School nor Ohio State are in the division. With a look at the league top to bottom, we turn to WA&D's Noah Newman.
It's wide open in the West. Hard to pick a favorite, but we can start with 14th ranked Wisconsin. The Badgers will rely heavily on star running back Melvin Gordon, who ran for 1,600 yards last season. And with the departure of James White, he should see an increased workload. They'll need him in week 1 when they open up against 13th ranked LSU.
Round 1 coming at us, guaranteed a 12-round fight, so we're going to fight like crazy in round 1 and see what happens.
The only guy in the Big Ten who ran for more yards than Gordon last year was Nebraska's Amir Abdullah. The Alabama native is a big reason why Nebraska is ranked 22nd in the country. Iowa and Minnesota should be in the mix. Both teams won 8 games last year, and both teams returned several starters, especially on defense.
Kids have worked hard. I mean, the kids that were here last year are a year older, so they're going to be a year better and understand things more.
Few teams face as much adversity as Northwestern this offseason. There was the unionization attempt. Running back Vendrick Mark decided to transfer. Senior wideout Christian Jones suffered a season-ending injury, but the Wildcats do have a lot of guys back from last year, including quarterback Trevor Siemian.
I believe there's no more unified football program in the country. We've been through more since probably January than most, and it's been nothing but a positive.
In West Lafayette, it's year 2 of the Darrell Hazel era. The Boilermakers won just 1 game last year. Sophomore Danny Etling has a year under his belt at quarterback. He'll try to improve an offense that ranked dead last in the Big Ten last season. So in a division that doesn't have a clear-cut favorite, Illinois has to be saying, why not us? If West Lunt is as good as advertised and the young defense starts to click, there's no reason to think Illinois can't get to that 6-win mark and become bowl eligible for the first time in the Tim Beckman era.
The belief in the system and the belief in one another and the belief that this football team needs to make take that next stride. And we have the last 2 years, nothing to brag about, 2 to 4, but again, it was better. We've made those strides off the football field. Now let's make them on Zupke Field.
Well, a new division, we've gone ahead and kicked Ohio State out of it. In fact, the two teams that were at the Big Ten Championship are in the same division now, so that opens up a spot for one of these teams. I guess let's start the discussion with who are the favorites in the Big Ten West.
In the West, I think you got to go with Nebraska, Wisconsin, ranked very high as well. Illinois plays both those teams early in the season and begins the big season at Nebraska. Things didn't go well there last year, Matt, and I'd have to give the nod to the Cornhuskers and the Badgers.
I'd say watch out for Iowa too. Jake Rudock's in his second year starting there, and Kirk Ferentz will have to replace a few key pieces on defense, mainly at the linebacker role, but it seems he's gotten that program back on good footing. Like you mentioned, Wisconsin and Nebraska are two teams to watch as well. Minnesota too. I mean, Jerry Kill, at 8-2 last year through the first 10 games for the Golden Gophers. They lost their final 3, but he seems to have that program going in the right direction. So I'd say those 4, and possibly a bounce back year for Northwestern after a very disappointing year, although losing Vendrick Mark this late in the season is obviously a blow to Pat Fitzgerald.
I see, I heard 5 teams mentioned, and none of them were Illinois. What is Illinois' place in this division?
I'd say 5th or 6th right now. That's what all the preseason magazines had them at, was 6th. I believe one had them at 5th. If they can, the schedule isn't favorable for them on the road. Going to Nebraska, like Steve mentioned, open up Big Ten play under the lights at Lincoln, and a sellout crowd there will be a very hostile environment. Going to Wisconsin, going to Ohio State. I know they're in the East Division now, but those 3 road games right now, you can look at the schedule and say Illinois is not gonna win those games right now, based on the way the defense played last year. But if they can finish in the middle of the pack, the goal for Illinois this year isn't to win a Big Ten title by any means. I know that's Tim Beckman's goal every year, but for them, it's to get to a bowl game.
And to get to that bowl game, obviously they need 6 wins, and if you're going to do that, you got to win some of those almost toss-up home Big Ten games. I'm not sure that Illinois will be favored, even at home, over anybody but Purdue. I think they'll be an underdog perhaps to Minnesota and Iowa, Wisconsin, some of those games. But I think to get to 6 wins, they're going to have to get through that preseason schedule with 3 wins at least there. Winning at Washington will be tough. And then they got to win some home Big Ten games, because the road games, as Matt indicated, there'll be a heavy underdog in those.
Right. We saw that the schedule is similar to what it was a couple of years ago, having to go to Wisconsin, having to go to Columbus, having to go to Northwestern, a game you might think is winnable if you had it in your building. They did play them tough last year. Let's do some quick hitters about the teams in the division, though. Starting with Wisconsin, a team that last year, there were days where it seemed like 3 guys could rush for 100 yards. They're still going to run the ball well with Melvin Gordon, but I know there's some questions at quarterback. Gary Anderson, maybe the second worst kept quarterback secret so far, because it sounds like some information may have leaked with the quarterback battle.
Yeah, I mean, you got Joel Stave last year as a starter, started for 2 years. Injuries kind of hurt his 2012 season, but Tanner McAvoy has kind of thrown his hat in the mix, and it seems he might start tonight against LSU. I know last month at Big Ten Media Days, Gary Anderson said he might not name a starter until they run out there for the first play against the Tigers, but it seems McAvoy kind of has that edge. He gives them more of a running threat, and Stavi's kind of hasn't developed, I don't think, as a passer at quite the rate they want. So it doesn't matter, though. They can hand the ball off to Melvin Gordon and be just fine.
Steve, you mentioned Nebraska. Let's take some quick thoughts on them. Why do you think they're a contender?
Well, the first thing I think about is their running back, Abdullah, who had 200, whatever you said it was, 225 against Illinois. I think he's still running against the Fighting Illini. He's really, really good. He's back. They've got a quarterback in Armstrong that's kind of one of those game manager types that really all you got to do is hand it off to Abdullah. Right. And their defense is pretty good as well.
Right, some improved defense. No more giving up 70 points in a Big Ten championship game, I don't think, from these Huskers. Please got that in check. Well, up next, we'll talk about the Big Ten East. How big of an impact will Braxton Miller's injury have in the standings? We'll weigh in next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten football.
It's time for the Inside the Illini Play of the Week, brought to you by Decatur Athletic Club. Throughout the year, we'll give you the top moments from the previous week's game, but since we're just getting started, here's the top moment from camp. A particularly warm day at Camp Rantoul set up a perfect opportunity for the Illini to take part in the Ice Bucket Challenge, supporting ALS research. Virtually the entire team got the bucket. Junior college transfer Jihad Ward got a bonus one.
Welcome back to the show as we dive into the Big Ten's East Division. That's where we find the newcomers, Maryland and Rutgers. We wish the Terps and Scarlet Knights well because they get a division with both of last year's Big Ten title game participants, Michigan State and Ohio State. The always dangerous Wolverines are there, as are Penn State and Indiana. Already some big news out of the East, as about midway through camp it was announced Braxton Miller would miss the season with a torn labrum, his second injury to that shoulder in 8 months. Our own Noah Newman, born and raised a Buckeye fan, wipes the tears away and talks about what the injury means for the Buckeyes and the rest of the division.
The East Division features two heavyweights in 5th-ranked Ohio State and 8th-ranked Michigan State, two teams that met in last year's Big Ten championship game. The Buckeyes were dealt a devastating blow earlier this month when they lost the services of starting quarterback Braxton Miller. The Heisman hopeful injured his shoulder in practice and will miss the entire season. He's impossible to replace, but the talented J.T. Barrett, a redshirt freshman, will give it a try.
Very businesslike about his approach. You know, he's not someone you have to watch to see their demeanor because it's the same as it was 2 weeks ago. And we all know what's coming down the barrel at him.
With Miller out, Michigan State might be the team to beat. With the emergence of quarterback Connor Cook, the defending Rose Bowl champs now have a rock-solid offense to go along with that suffocating defense, a defense which held opponents to under 13 points per game last season. The Buckeyes and Spartans will meet November 8th in East Lansing.
Big game, a lot of media attention. Should be a great football game. It'll be an exciting game at our place.
A week before that game, Michigan State will have to get past in-state rival Michigan. The Wolverines were a disappointing 7-6 last year. The good news for them is they still have Devin Gardner, a game-changing playmaker at quarterback who threw for just under 3,000 yards last season and ran for nearly 500. Speaking of good quarterbacks, first-year head coach James Franklin has one, and Christian Hackenberg. The sophomore might be the most talented QB in the conference, but can his inexperienced offensive line give him enough time to throw the ball? That could be the key to Penn State's season.
Getting into the new system, we really didn't know what to expect, so I think that with the limited amount of time that we've had in the system so far, we gelled very well.
Newcomers Maryland and Rutgers come in with relatively low expectations, but don't sleep on the Terrapins' passing game. Quarterback C.J. Brown is a 6-year senior. Last year he returned from an ACL injury and became the first quarterback in school history to throw for 2,000 yards and run for 500 in a single season.
We're still building our program in terms of developing the depth and the talent, that we need in order to be able to win championships, but that's our goal and our approach.
And last but not least, there's Indiana. Talented offensively, but challenged defensively. In 2013, they scored 38 points per game, second only behind Ohio State in the conference, but their defense gave up 38 points per game, which was dead last in the conference.
Braxton Miller told fans he would be back next year. Let's see how healthy he is when that time comes. But of course, that's kind of been dominating the discussion nationally across college football, not just in the Big Ten. How big of an impact is that going to have for the Buckeyes this year?
Well, I think it'll be very big. He did have surgery, by the way, this week, and he said that went very well. Coming out of that surgery, Dr. James Andrews did the surgery.
No one better.
If you're going to have shoulder surgery, you might as well get the best guy to do it, and he did. But it's a big factor for Ohio State. They were already a little light on the offensive line. They lost their top running back in Carlos Hyde last year, so it was going to be the Braxton Miller show. They've got some good receivers. They've got a redshirt freshman that will play at quarterback, T.J. Barrett, and I think a lot of folks talk very highly of him. Nobody expected him to play this early, though, so I think it'll be a big factor for them, at least early in the year. But, it's Ohio State. They've got great athletes, and they always will. They'll be right in the hunt.
Matt Miller out, Barrett in. What do you think?
It vaults Michigan State to the top of the East Division, in my humble opinion. Connor Cook really emerged last year in the latter half of the season, and everyone saw what he could do in the Rose Bowl against Stanford. And Jeremy Langford's back for Michigan State. I think it really puts Michigan State in the driver's seat for the East Division going into the season. And even with Miller's injury, some of the big question marks around Ohio State are just on the defensive side of the ball, particularly in the secondary. Clemson, lit them up in the Orange Bowl last year, and Michigan State was able to pick them apart in the Big Ten title game at times. So Miller's injury is obviously a huge blow for the Buckeyes and the faithful in Columbus, but I think you have to be feeling pretty good right now if you're a fan in East Lansing.
Yeah, I think Michigan State is definitely set up for success. They do lose a little bit on defense, guys like Darqueze Dennard. My favorite stat in my research for this was that cornerback Trey Waynes, who was Dennard's backup, had 3 interceptions, which was how many interceptions the Illinois football team had total last season.
3.
That Michigan State defense will reload, and they're probably licking their chops in that division right now. Let's talk about some of the other teams. I'm interested to talk about Penn State. You hear James Franklin talk, a guy that's really impressed me so far. He seems to be the right fit there at Penn State.
Yeah, he's made some waves on the recruiting trail and brought that sterling reputation he had there from Vanderbilt. The biggest issue regarding the Nittany Lions is just their depth. They can't afford any injuries anywhere, particularly at the quarterback spot. Hackenberg picked apart defenses at times last year and route to the conference freshman of the year and should do the same again. But when Penn State visits Champaign in late November, I think that's a game Illinois can win based on what Illinois did last year in Happy Valley and just with the depth issues that Penn State has going into this year.
James Franklin, also the tight ends coach for Washington State in 1998. Didn't know if you guys knew that.
Little known facts that Matt Lovelace throws out about his Cougar.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the depth issue at Penn State is going to be something we're talking about here for another couple of years yet.
Yeah.
But I think their first 40, 45 guys are pretty good football players, and that will keep them in games, provided they don't have a lot of injuries, and injuries are part of the game, no doubt. And I agree with Matt, that's a game that I think Illinois can win at home, but I also think it's one that Penn State can come in to Champaign and get. So that's one of those toss-up games at home, I think.
Some of us got to meet coaches with Maryland and Rutgers and a couple players for the first time at Big Ten Media Days. How do you think those guys fit into this conference? I know Rutgers has had some struggles recently.
They have. So has Maryland at times. Right. They don't enhance the league's football reputation by any means. The dividends, I think, will be in basketball with what the Terrapins and their program brings to that regard. But football-wise, they're okay. I mean, former Illinois offensive coordinator Mike Loxley's running the show for the Terrapins as well. And Rutgers, was in a bowl game last year against Notre Dame. Maryland was in a bowl game last year as well. But it'll be an adjustment, I think, for those two teams when you face Ohio State and Michigan State, and those teams come to Piscataway or College Park, and it'll be. I'm curious to see how they'll do in their first year in the Big Ten.
What do you think?
I can't get warmed up to it. Matter of fact, when you look down at the conference breakdown, you're saying, what are those guys doing in there? But they're there. Illinois won't know it for a while.
Yeah, for a couple of years at least.
They won't play them for a while. So we'll see. I agree with Matt on Maryland making Big Ten basketball maybe a little better. Rutgers doesn't do much for me on either one.
Well, let's shift our focus back to Illinois, and the main reason many fans have some excitement coming off that 4-8 season. Wes Lunt is your starting quarterback. Let's get past all the faux suspense about the so-called quarterback battle and talk about what he can bring to this team starting today. Stick with us. Inside the Illini returns next.
Inside the Illini, Big Ten college football.
Welcome back to the show here in our brand new studio here at WAND. It was an inevitability when Rochester graduate Wes Lunt said he was transferring to Illinois in June of 2013. Lunt was the hometown guy. He made a splash in his true freshman season in the Big 12. He was the prototypical QB, and now 14 months later, he's Illinois' starter.
You're going to be nervous, anxious, but really excited.
Standard emotions for a quarterback set to start for what's basically his hometown team. But the journey for Wes Lunt was a little more complicated than a trip down I-72. Flash back to 2012. Lunt arm in arm with his Cowboy teammates. For a while, it looked like a match made in heaven.
Lunt gets a shotgun snap, back to pass, throws it deep down the middle for Isaiah Anderson, makes the catch.
A year from now, he ought to be much better than he is now, and then 2 years from now, even better than that.
But an injury in the third game of his college career put Lunt on the sidelines. He saw little time while his replacements flourished.
Clint's getting the most reps, which he should. He did a great job ending the season, and J-Dub and I are just going to push him every day, and whatever happens, happens.
Following the spring season in 2013, Lunt decided his best option was to transfer. He announced his intent to come to Illinois in June.
It's not a one-man team, I know that, but if I can help Illinois in any way, I will, and I will try as hard as I can to get the best people around us.
The waiting was the hardest part. Lunt ran the scout team, and he watched games from the sidelines. He didn't get his first taste with the number ones, until spring ball in 2014.
It feels different just to compete, like I said, not be on the scout team. It's fun to be out here and actually run our offense.
From that point on, the announcement in week 3 of training camp was just an inevitability. Lunt was going to start.
It's something I wanted to happen really bad.
It didn't seem like long ago. Lunt was leading the Rochester Rockets to back-to-back state titles, and in the very stadium he's jogging into Saturday morning.
I'm going to be really excited, a little bit nervous for the game, just ready for it to happen.
A lot of people are excited about Lunt's appearance as the starter. A lot of people were expecting it, but I got to ask you this question in the middle of Camp Rantoul, Matt. People who haven't seen Camp Rantoul, or people who maybe didn't see the spring game, why is it Wes Lunt?
He can make all the throws in Bill Cubitt's pass-heavy offense. He's got the prototypical size. People make comparisons to Tom Brady with him. Jeff George, another notable transfer that Illinois had. He really opens up Illinois' offense and the dynamics that Cubitt wants to exploit. Cubitt's told me that they've really taken it to even another level with Lunt at quarterback. You'd see Nathan Shieldhouse make throws down the field. He'd have to put his whole body into the throw. With Lunt, it seems he can just flick his wrist and throw the ball 50 yards, no problem. So it was pretty clear cut once he transferred here, he was going to be the starter, and he is now.
As Matt mentioned, he's a drop-back guy. He's not a guy you're going to see scrambling much, I don't think, and he's not nearly as mobile, obviously, as Shieldhouse or even as Riley O'Toole, as far as that goes, and certainly not as mobile as Aaron Bailey, who likely will see some time, hopefully, in blowout games for the Illini. I'm not concerned with Wes Lunt because I think he's really good. One thing that I'm still waiting to see about is how good is he? I mean, he got the job as a freshman at Oklahoma State, got hurt, but then didn't win the job back in the spring and then decided to transfer. So I want to see if he can take it to the next level here.
Yeah, and I mentioned it. I don't want to make too big a deal out of the fact that he hasn't played in almost 2 full years, but I also don't want to ignore that fact. Matt, what do you think? Should we temper our expectations a little bit coming out of the gate?
Well, I don't think he's going to throw for 5,000 yards this year, maybe 4,000. No, I'm not. I don't even think 4,000.
I was going to say, people would be happy with that.
Cubitt's told me before that he's really interested to see how Lunt handles, facing a pass rush for the first time, and how he also, this is just me talking now, how he stays healthy too. He dislocated a kneecap and suffered a concussion that really derailed his freshman season at Oklahoma State. If he didn't suffer those injuries, I don't think we're talking about him right now being the starting quarterback at Illinois, and how well the offensive line really protects him this year is going to be a huge area to watch. But I know Cubitt's really interested to see how he does handle the rush and gets rid of the ball. He showed a tendency at times in Rantoul to really hold on to the ball too long. And with some newcomers in that offensive line, particularly at the right tackle spot, those edge rushers might be licking their lips trying to get to Lunt this year.
I guess we might reserve a few of our opinions until we see what happens today, and really until we see what happens in Big Ten play with Wes Lunt. But at least it's an exciting thing to think about if he could be one of those guys that puts up 4,000 yards.
He'd be the first one ever at Illinois to do so.
I pointed out to him the obvious earlier this week. I said, it's been a while since you've been hit.
Yep.
Because they don't hit him in practice, and he's sat out for over a year. So he said he was kind of anxious to get that first game hit and then to move on from there.
We wish him luck. We'll also talk about some NFL training camp coming up. It's about to wrap up. Illinois rookies on the roster bubble, and I don't care that he's not an Illinois grad. Jimmy Garoppolo making the most of his opportunities, as I'm going to talk about him. The first installment of Illini and the Pros is next on Inside the Illini, Big Ten Football.
Inside the Illini, Big Ten College Football.
The NFL season doesn't start for 5 days. That's when my Seahawks play the Packers. Matt said I always get a mention, and of course I got to mention them. We have another 8 days until the full schedule starts, and for us, the preseason has been about more than Brian Hoyer and Johnny Manziel. Time for our first 2014 installment of Illini and the Pros.
Many of the faces are familiar. Offensive lineman Jeff Allen is still a Chief. Former teammate John Asamoah isn't, now on the line for the Atlanta Falcons. Mikel LaShore continues to fight for a spot in the Lions' backfield, while Rashard Mendenhall called it a career in the offseason. Michael Omenauanui returns with the Patriots. He's fighting to get on the practice field, battling an undisclosed injury. As far as the rookies, linebacker Jonathan Brown has 4 total tackles in preseason games against the Texans and Vikings. Brown survived Week 3 cuts, but is not projected to make the 53-man roster for the Cardinals. Brian Langford signed with the Dolphins after the draft, waived 2 days later, then picked up by the Colts in May. He's still listed in Indianapolis's official roster, but he too is expected to miss the final cut. Steve Hull, who had an All-American caliber second half to his senior season at Illinois, signed with the Saints in May, but he says injuries that plagued him throughout college caught up with him. He announced his retirement from football earlier this month. And he didn't don the orange and blue, but Eastern Illinois' Jimmy Garoppolo may be the most talked about Central Illinois-based college player at an NFL training camp. Going into the Patriots' 4th preseason game, Garoppolo completed 65% of his passes for 334 yards and 4 touchdowns with 0 interceptions.
I'm so glad I drafted you in the 2nd round.
He may not supplant Tom Brady anytime soon, but Garoppolo's camp has proven he very well could someday.
After 1 or 2 plays, I mean, it's just football. So, I mean, you just got to go out there and do what you always do, and, the rest will take care of itself.
It's almost showtime. We'll be making our picks for the big games coming our way today. That's next on Inside the Illini Big Ten Football.
Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football.
Welcome back. Time now for our weekly Pick'em. Each week we'll pick our favorite game. We'll give you a winner. We'll keep track of those standings throughout the year. And week 1 of the college football season, I guess, didn't necessarily provide us with a ton of great fodder. There is a game overseas. We're talking about Penn State. Is that Ireland?
Dublin.
Dublin, Ireland. Wow, incredible. All right, let's start with our picks for the game. Matt, you said you picked a game for the paper. It's 2 teams. When you say them together, you bring back memories of a few years back.
And I'm going to make more memories today. I'm going Appalachian State. They're going to knock off Michigan in the Big House. And in a few hours, when I'm right, you can all think back to this moment.
I'll buy you a frosty cold drink.
I want to ask you why. Why do you think that?
It's Appalachian State at Michigan. You can't go against what happened 7 years ago, and I'm sticking to that script. And feel free to put this on YouTube when I'm right or when I'm wrong and Michigan beats them 56-0.
I seem to recall Michigan was number 5 the last time. They're not quite rated that high this year, so I guess it's technically more likely, so I'm not going to fault you for that.
No, they aren't. Devin Gardner's very inconsistent at times, and the running game last year for Michigan was non-existent, and it's a game that, Michigan has to deal with that mental barrier too. I know the guys that are playing the game today weren't there 7 years ago, but I'm sure they've heard and probably seen that game from 2007, and going with Appalachian State.
One of the smartest football guys I know. I'm going to disagree with him on that and go with the Big Ten's Michigan.
What about you? Your game, LSU, Wisconsin. I want to hear your prediction on this one.
I'd really like to pick the Badgers in that ball game, but going against a Southeastern Conference foe, it's not a road game, it's a neutral site game. I'm going to have to go with LSU in that. I think it might be a good game, but I'd like to see Wisconsin win, but I got to go with the Bayou Bengals.
Very good game to start the season. Clemson, Georgia. That's a matchup we've seen before. Thank goodness they're kicking off the season. That'll be a big game tonight. I'm going to go ahead and pick Georgia. They're the home team in this one. They've got a lot of aspirations there in the SEC, so that's my pick.
I think being at Sanford Stadium really helps the Bulldogs out, and that's a really good game to see the first weekend of the season. 2 top 20 teams going at it.
We only have a couple of those. We'll relish those for now as schedule ramps up a little bit. Well, game time is near for the Illini, that Illinois Youngstown State, the one everybody's talking about, right? We will talk about what we know about Youngstown State, a top 25 FCS team ready to give them a scare. We'll lead you right up to kickoff next on Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. Less than 9 minutes from now to kickoff of the 2014 Illinois football season, and asking ourselves, what do we know about Youngstown State? For starters, their nickname is the Penguins. Isn't he cute? We know a little more than that, as we'll show you in our preview of the matchup.
It's a familiar opponent for Illinois head coach Tim Beckman.
One of those programs that is, that is known throughout this country.
The Youngstown State Penguins look to waddle their way out of Champaign with an upset victory, something another Missouri Valley team nearly did a year ago.
The Illini have held on to win.
Last week we had
really good preparation for Illinois. So I think our kids are excited.
Dante Nania will start after serving as the backup to four-year starter Kurt Hess.
The quarterback that they're going to start played obviously a few games last year. Seems to be very, very athletic, but yet has a strong enough arm to make some plays.
Working the option again to Ruiz.
What he lacks in experience, he'll make up for in weapons. All-conference running back Martin Ruiz returns, as do a number of receivers. In fact, returning receivers account for more than 4,700 career yards in total. By contrast, Illinois has less than half that.
Touchdown at Youngstown State.
It's the reason the Gwins are a consensus top 25 FCS team.
This is our biggest, most athletic group that we've had up front since I've been here.
They're going to come in here and give us their best shot, and the key for us is obviously they get our best shot.
You go play at a school like this, and you want to showcase that you're good enough to play with them.
Fans won't care how good an FCS team is. It's still an FCS team. The Illini and head coach Tim Beckman need to make the statement that a Big Ten team should.
We have to prove ourselves too.
It gives you chills down your back thinking about Saturday. Coming out here, fans roaring, new guys stepping up, old guys still making plays. It's going to be fun.
Let's all go down to the Gwin game. Gotta get used to saying that, the Gwins. I like Penguins, though. I like the full version of that. Youngstown State is an aggressive scheduling team. They had Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State each twice since 2006. They're used to this kind of game with Illinois, Steve.
They are indeed, and they had a win over Pittsburgh just a couple of years ago to start the season.
Pretty good one, too.
Yeah, 31-17 on the road, beating Pittsburgh. But this will be a tough challenge for them. Illinois has never lost to an FCS team, and they've won 13 straight and expected to win. Did you see a line on this? We don't talk much about favorites and such, but I think Illinois would have to be a couple of touchdown favorite at least, don't you think, Matt?
Yeah, I would say so. And the one area I'm really interested to watch with Illinois in regards to Youngstown State is how well Illinois' defensive line gets after Youngstown State's offensive line. The Penguins, the five that will start out there have a combined 5 starts going into today's game, and this is an opportunity for a defensive line that really didn't get after the quarterback last year to kind of have a field day and see who can emerge maybe as an elite pass rusher.
Sounds like they do have some weapons on offense. We mentioned Ruiz there. He's a 1,000-yard rusher as a freshman. He'll obviously be 1 year bigger, 1 year more experienced. They do have a lot back in the receiving core. And Steve, you can talk about the defensive test for Illinois here.
Well, obviously any success will be welcomed on the defensive side no matter who it's against, but they're going to have to stop the running game first. You mentioned Ruiz. They don't have the record-breaking quarterback they had last year. They've got a new guy there, and Dania. He'll be running the show, managing the game. Eric Wolford is how he put it earlier in this week as preparation got going for this. So I think they'll have to, the defense will have to tackle better, obviously, no matter who they're playing, and stop that Penguin passing game.
Couple minutes left. This is a great opportunity to just kind of get, our thoughts on 2014 for the Illini as a whole. Hey, looking up the notes, if Lunt leads the Big Ten in passing, then Illinois is just where they were last year. Let's talk about what this team needs to do starting today to show those improvements, maybe talking about a bowl game.
Yeah, like I said at the top of the show, they just need to tackle better. The tackling was non-existent last year, and Illinois might have to win some games 52-48 this year. I think they have enough pieces in place to make a bowl game this year. 6 wins, maybe 7 wins with the way the schedule's set up. Anything less than that, and it'll make for a mighty interesting late November, early December meeting between Tim Beckman and Mike Thomas.
What do you think, Steve? Predictions for the year? Is a bowl game in the sights? You gotta add up to 6.
I get that. Yeah, I think it's in the sights. I think it could come down to that last game against Northwestern. When you look at Northwestern's schedule and Illinois' schedule, both those teams could be playing for the right to go to a bowl game with a 6th victory in that. But back to what they need to do to get there, they got to get some turnovers. Mm-hmm. They've got to intercept more than 3 passes. They just have not been very good that way, and with that goes the other side. You can't turn it over as the season goes.
They're not losing much on defense. I think there's some promise there, and we've talked about the depth, only having 5 or 6 guys that maybe switch out on the front 9. Now they say 10 or 11 guys that they have there. We'll see how all those pieces are interchangeable. We do have a secondary that's a year older. Starts up front, but that secondary needs to get there to get some of those turnovers. So that'll be interesting to watch as the season goes on. Trying to add it up to 6. I'll tell you what, though, it starts today. Without a win today, it might be a different conversation Tim Beckman and Mike Thomas are having at the end of the season. We'll see how that goes, but we're optimistic for today. Youngstown State versus Illinois. That does it for us here on Inside the Illini Big Ten Football. We'll be back here every game day morning to get you ready for the Illinois matchup. Next week, it's Western Kentucky. You guys feel good about that one too?
Sure.
Yes, why
There
not?
we go. Be sure to catch coverage of today's game tonight here on WAND on the radio at Sports Talk 1400 and in the Champaign News-Gazette tomorrow morning and on Twitter today as well from Matt Daniels. Thanks for joining us here. We'll see you back here next week.
Thank you for watching Inside the Illini Big Ten College Football, brought to you by Illini HQ, the News-Gazette, News Talk 1400 WDWS, and WAND.